When I was in high school, the World Series of Poker were starting to get really popular, and a lot of young people from my generation became obsessed with Texas Hold'em poker. My friends and I actually set up a poker room in our garage, and I can remember several late nights spent entrenched in some very serious gaming. And I remember at one point somebody came to me and said that gambling is a sin. And this is actually a very common thought within the church, within certain Christian circles. So where does this thought come from? Is it true that gambling is a sin? What does the Bible have to say? $20 says I can give you the answer. Just kidding. Let's get into it. Attention, bargain shoppers. So the question, is gambling a sin, brings up two major concepts that we need to discuss. The first one is culture versus scripture. When I was in seminary, one of the very first classes that they mandated all students take was on exegesis and how to properly interpret scripture. And one of the things they emphasized during this class was that we all bring things to the table, things that influence how we read the Bible, things we've learned at church, things our family might have taught us, things we've learned in school, from our friends, from the media that we consume. And as we read the Bible through this lens that we use, we sometimes have a tendency to graft our own opinions onto scripture. In other words, our culture can sometimes overshadow scripture. Why do I bring this up? Because if you were to ask that person who way back in the day told me gambling was a sin, and you were to ask them, why do you believe this? They might quote some scripture like Ecclesiastes 5:10, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This is also vanity." Or 1 Timothy 6:9, "But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare." Or any number of other verses that talk about money. The problem with that, from a theological perspective, is that none of these verses are addressing gambling directly. They're just merely broad concepts about money in general. And it's tempting, I know, to take these verses out of context and use them to support views that we already hold. But that is not a great way to go about interpreting scripture. I've looked into it thoroughly, and as far as I can tell, there's only one verse in the Bible that actually comes close to addressing gambling. And that would be Proverbs 13:11, which says, "Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it." Now, this verse is found in the book of Proverbs. There are many different types of genres in the Bible, and depending on which genre we're reading, speaks to how we should interpret the scripture. Proverbs is in a group of books known as wisdom literature. And wisdom literature, especially the Proverbs, should be read as principles, not promises. What I mean by that is we're meant to read these books as truisms, how things should be, wise words to live by, not as God's commands. I mean, if you think about it makes sense. In Proverbs it says, "Wealth gained hastily will dwindle," which is more often than not the case, but it is possible to gain wealth hastily and have it not dwindle. Most of the time dwindling is going to happen, but it's not necessarily a promise from God. So this verse in Proverbs could be applied to gambling, could also be applied to many other things. Think about it more as a warning versus a law. If there's a sign that says, "Watch your step," it means that you would be dumb to ignore it, but you're not going to jail if you trip and fall. Which brings me to the second concept that we need to discuss today. Let me share with you some writings from Paul in 1 Corinthians. He says, "I have the right to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others." So I share this verse with you. Just because something's not technically a sin doesn't mean it's a good idea to take that path. There are a lot of ideas that people hold, which tend to be more cultural than biblical. And I call a lot of these things out on this channel. But I'm doing it because I believe in the integrity of scripture and in speaking truth to people. Just because you might be able to justify something doesn't mean it's going to benefit you. I took a lot of flack on my "Are Tattoos a Sin" video. You can check that out here. But the reason I do this is because this is a theology channel and it is concerned with accurate theology. Theology cuts through our preconceived ideas, our cultural understandings, our opinions, and gets right to biblical truth. But like Paul points out in his verse, just because you can justify something doesn't mean it's a good idea to do it. Gambling destroys people's lives, families, careers. I want you to understand God's truth about it, but I don't want you to fall into the trap of addiction or ruin. Please keep in mind 1 Peter 5:8. Be sober-minded. Be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking somebody to devour. So be careful out there. That's it for today. If you or somebody you love is struggling with a gambling addiction, I'm going to leave a link in the comments where you can get some more information and find some help. I'm also going to put the verses I used today down in the comment section. If you want to leave a comment, I'll do my best to respond. My name is Adam. This is Bargain Bin Theology. And remember, you get what you pay for.